In olden days, and we might think about today as well, when people could not pay their debts, they sometimes sold themselves or their spouses or their children to get enough money to pay the debt that was owed. Or a family member might enter into a forced labor arrangement temporarily or permanently that amounted to slavery, labor enslavement. Excessive debt is a powerful means of controlling a person or a group or a nation. So in Hebrew law, there was a Sabbath year, a year of Jubilee, those regularly occurring specified times every 7th year when people were released from their debts. A time when not only debts were forgiven, but also when people were released from debt slavery. You might call it an early version of limited liability law, when debts were forgiven, when those in labor enslavement were set free, rebalancing the imbalance of power and of resource sharing. And the purpose of the Hebrew laws was to keep the powerful from harming those without power. These laws were about the justice of heaven coming to earth, which is the main point of the Jesus prayer. In essence, the words, "As we forgive our debtors," which immediately follow, "Give us this day our daily bread," is about actual hope for enough bread for today without incurring debt for tomorrow. A hope especially for the most vulnerable, the people with the fewest resources, to have what they need for today, each day, without a huge penalty following them into their future. Debt forgiven is that ancient, that current dream of have-nots in the earth. A longing for there to be enough for everyone, with no debtors' prisons, no indentured servanthood, no sweatshops, no tenant farmers and day laborers, no child trafficking, no modern-day slavery, especially for the people of the earth just trying to survive, vulnerable people at the mercy of those who control the resources. John Dominic Crossan concludes in Matthew's version of the prayer Jesus taught, "Both debt and sin are intended by the author of Matthew. Not debt alone, not sin alone, and absolutely not sin instead of debt, but both together." We're easily caught up in the idea of sin being the little unpleasant things we do, our crankiness and unkind words, feelings that make us feel uncomfortable, those unconfessed thoughts we never expected we would have. But our sin against God, our sin against others, our sin against ourselves, our sin against all creation is failing to be partners with God and bringing the ways of heaven to be so on earth. Our indebtedness to God, what we owe to God, what God expects of us and invites and calls us to, is to live our whole lives in partnership with God, making justice reign throughout the world so that everyone has enough. Our very purpose for being is to run God's world with God, through God, and in God, to heal and make whole the brokenness in our world that leads to brokenness among God's children. This is what we owe to God. This is our indebtedness to God. As Crossan puts it, we owe it to God to run God's world responsibly. We owe the divine householder the conservation of the world house. We owe the divine homemaker the consecration of the earth home. We owe God adequate care of all God's children. We owe God collaboration in hallowing God's name, in establishing God's kingdom, in doing God's will as in heaven, so also on earth. We owe it to God to cease focusing on heaven especially in order to avoid focusing on earth. We owe it to God to ensure that there is enough food and not too much death in God's well-run household. Praying to God, seeking forgiveness, is not a wishy-washy, touchy-feely, warm, fuzzy experience just to make us feel better. It's a request to be set free, not to keep living the way we've been living, but a new opportunity to live as people of God, to begin again living in partnership with divine love, giving our lives to living justice and spreading justice throughout the earth. Forgiving those indebted to us is about releasing others from unfair obligation, allowing them to become all that God is calling them to be. I don't have the answers to how to fix all the injustices throughout our world or in our own country. I don't know how to fix the economic issues and the resulting problems between the city of Detroit and the suburbs and the state. Sometimes it's challenging just dealing fairly and justly with economic diversity in our own denomination, in our own presbytery, in our own congregation. But I do know this. We are called to do justice, to do all we can to make certain everyone has enough, that people are not obligated to others in unjust ways, and especially in ways that go on and on and on, trapping people in an endless cycle of poverty. I know that broken hearts are broken not only by interpersonal encounters, not just by thoughtless and unintentional things or even intentional mean things we do to each other or neglect to do for one another. These actions are harmful, to be sure, breaking hearts and diminishing lives. But hearts are broken and kept from healing, hindered from being made whole by bigger things than our daily little actions or lack of action. We help make broken hearts whole by allowing our lives to be transformed and by transforming the world around us. God makes broken hearts whole by transforming people and by transforming societies. Even though I don't have the answers or the exact programs and policies required to heal the broken world and the broken hearts throughout the world, the other thing I know is this. We hallow God's name by partnering with God to make the ways of heaven to be so on earth, so that there is daily justice and daily bread for today without too much debt for tomorrow. Thanks be to God. Amen.